Hi, this is Ashisha Bidekar and welcome to my podcast, The ARB Show. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Vivek Singh. Vivek is an alumnus of IIM Ahmedabad. He is a presentation designer and storyteller. He runs a presentation design agency called Jazz Factory Consulting. He helps young startups and established companies tell a compelling story to their customers, investors, employees, and stakeholders. He also conducts presentation and storytelling workshops. He has delivered talks and workshops at Google, Microsoft, IIM Trichy, IIM Ahmedabad, CIIE, Forge, and T-Hub. He's also the author of 2 books, For Brand Sake and Presentation Masala. Welcome to the show, Vivek. Do share your life journey and how you became a storyteller.
Thank you, Ashish, and first of all, thanks for having me here. I think it's lovely. I'll just keep it short. So the way I kind of became a presentation designer, which is not a very common profession, is it all I think started when I was in college. So when I went to IIM, and that was a turning point for me. And obviously IIM exposes you to so much of making presentations, right? And then I moved to sales, I moved into marketing, and there's so many presentations to be made that initially I was very scared. I was like terrified of going and making presentations, but eventually you realize that you have to do it. So I took interest, I read books, I tried to do something different, because to me presentations had become a social experiment. Like you are able to change something in every meeting if you actually look at it seriously, right? You can change somebody's opinion about something, get something done. So there's actual change happening. And I took active interest while I was properly in a job in marketing. I started blogging. This is way back when blogging used to be famous, if you remember. I started blogging in 2008. I blogged for a long number of years, almost 600 plus posts on my blog. So that kind of started the journey of, because you have to blog, right? Now you are actively looking for material, you are reading, you are learning, you're watching TED Talks. And that kind of gave me a lot of learning. Plus, when I quit my job and wanted to do something on my own, then I was like, okay, why not do this, right? Because people obviously need help with this, and a lot of people don't like making presentations. So 2015, I quit and started doing this. It's been 8.5 years, and it's cool. I mean, it's fun to do something you like, and it's kind of very, very interesting. So yeah, that's how it all happened.
Great, thanks, Vivek. So as discussed, we have this format in this show where the guest talks of some top 3 or top 5 highlights in a specific domain. And since you are an expert at business storytelling, I request you to talk about maybe top 3 tips for business storytelling. And it is something which I'm sure the audience would really love it. And we have also created a presentation with the summary of your main thoughts. So we'll share that in the show call notes as well. Over to you, Vivek.
Yeah, so I think I like the format very much. And I think I will talk about 3 things as we have discussed. So it's business storytelling made easy, the top 3 tips. And in business storytelling, I want to talk about 3 things. 1, why you should tell stories at work. Because it's important to understand because storytelling has kind of become a fad also. A lot of people are now talking about storytelling. You can see a lot of books now. 10 years back, you would not find many books on storytelling, right? Suddenly, this has kind of become a big thing. And the funny part is, you will understand this point when I say in Hindi that kahani mat sunao, right? So storytelling in business sounds like kahani suna raha hai, spinning a tale. But that's not the point. So storytelling is kind of a very, it's a word that I would say is tough to grapple with early on. And when I started out, even as blogging, right? I told you I was blogging early on and not a professional storyteller. I was still grappling with what is this storytelling, right? I mean, why is it? How do you do it? So in these 3 tips, what I want to do is talk about why storytelling, what is a story in a business context, and how do you tell stories? Because eventually that's the whole point, right? So I would like to talk about why we should tell stories, and this is very interesting. Again, I think you would find also it's very, very relevant. Is that any presentation you make, right? Think about any serious presentation you make. There are 5 challenges that you face when you make a presentation, and I'm taking this material, adapting it from the book called Made to Stick, and you would find the name in the slides as well. Made to Stick, which is a phenomenal book. I would say the best book on communication ever written. And the challenges are, first, when you're making a presentation, think about the presentation. First is, why should somebody pay attention? Right? It's not necessary. If they've paid attention, how would they understand you? Because things can get complex. Why should they believe you? Will they remember what you have told them? And why should they care? A lot of times, for example, you have a pet project, you want the management to fund it, but it is your project, not theirs. So they're like, I don't care. I mean, why is this guy so enthused about it, right? So it's attention, understanding, belief, recall, and care. And the answer itself is also in the same book, which is, see, there are many tips for each, right? I can tell you 29 things about how to get attention, understanding, increase credibility, and all of that stuff. But if you can do one thing, one tool, that is to tell stories. Because the moment I tell you, Ashish, hey Ashish, do you know what happened last month? I went to that place. Suddenly you are like hooked on. Or if I tell you, let me tell you a story, everybody in the room would be like, okay, close the laptops, let's listen to this person. That's the power. That's the power of stories in business context. So if you want you want to overcome these challenges, I think you have to tell stories. That's the why part, the first part of it.
You are mentioning about some kind of incident at HUL, which you still remember after 15 years. So you said that
correct.
There is something.
Yeah, correct. In fact, that's something I would now say with the what as well, because I thought it will be fun. So let me tell you what is the story and then go back to that story. So what is a story then, right? Because as I said, I was also grappling with this for a long time while myself studying all these books. And the final simple definition I've arrived at is, in the business context, a story is an anecdote, an experience, an incident, something that has happened with you or somebody you know or with the organization. That's all. That is a story. And to give you an example, I will talk about the HUL story that you just mentioned. It's very, very interesting. So I think 15 years or so back, I was talking to somebody, a senior from IIM, and he was working with HUL. I did my summer internship there, by the way. So, but he was working there, and I asked him, how is the company? Generally, you meet seniors out of college and you ask, how is the company? And he said, yeah, it's very nice. You know, I mean, HUL was one of those best, kind of very highly regarded companies when we were working. So I said, Kaisa hai? And he said, yeah, it's very nice. And yeah, HR is very good. I'm like, what? HR is very good? And then narrated me a story. He says he was traveling on business from Mumbai to Lucknow. He had to book tickets. In those days, it was not something app-based or something, right? You had to write to your HR, explain the travel, and then they would book the flight ticket. So he got the tickets booked way in advance. Then before the flight, right, few days before the flight, he gets a call from the HR saying, so-and-so, sir, you have booked the flight tickets, but you have not booked the hotel. So have you forgotten? Can we help you out and make it comfortable for you or arrange your cab? And he was very taken aback. He was like, "Arey yaar, like, who does this?" Like, they're so bothered that they're actually checking if I have booked a hotel. And he told them, no, I was trying to save cost. I was anyways going to stay with a friend. So don't bother, but please, thank you so much for the care. And he told me this story. I don't know if he remembers it, but after 15 years, I still remember it. See, it doesn't matter if he was traveling to Lucknow or to Kanpur, right? It doesn't matter. What matters is that one story changed my opinion of the company forever. And I know the sample size is one. So all the statisticians who are listening would say, "Arey yaar." I mean, the sample size is one. But that's not how brain works, no? Every time you see stories are roaming around, go to LinkedIn, go to Twitter. There is one story about a company that's making the rounds. And that is how you start perceiving the company. These are all real stories, right? So I think that one story changed my perception of the company. I still regard the company as, wow, what a company, right? So I think, and what is the kind of story? This is a very simple personal story. It has happened. And instead of telling me my HR is good and stopping there, which is an opinion, he actually gave me a story which now becomes my belief. So he has changed my belief with the story rather than forcing his opinion on me, right? So I think that was not an intentional thing, but it turned out to be a very fantastic story. So that's the what is a story kind of the second part of the talk.
Great. So coming to the third point, you mentioned how to tell stories. So What are your pointers on storytelling on that?
So now that we have kind of accepted that it is important to tell stories in business, and we understand that stories are nothing but simple incidents that have happened with us or with somebody else, I think in the how we need to talk about two things. One is picking the right story to tell, and second is actually narrating it, right? And I think narration is not very something you have to worry about, because the moment you talk about a story that has actually happened with you, an incident, I think that passion will come in, right? You say, oh, I did this. The voice will automatically modulate. You don't have to do anything, right? Oh, last week I went to, for example, last week I went to the market, boss. You don't know, this happened, and then the client said this, and we went and searched and we found this. So narration, I am not worried. People are very good communicators. Nobody needs training there. But I think picking the story is very important, because one, we forget to even tell them. But two is what stories to tell, right? So now, there are a lot of templates. If you read books, and some of them I have referred in the notes as well, there are lots of templates which help you think in the right direction. But effectively, the story has to be relevant to what you want to tell. It's not an entertainment. Story is not being told to entertain, or it's not fictional, right? So I will give you some templates. I don't want to kind of make it too long, but there is a story template called origin story. Classic case of a startup pitching to an investor saying, look, this is how I got the idea, and they get hooked on. And if that story has relevance to the current pitch that you are making for money, it makes for a great startup. So origin story could be one. Personal stories, I've already talked about a personal story. Imagine is another template. I will talk about it. Customer story is a phenomenal template, and I will talk about that as well. And there is a David Goliath story template, a beautiful template where if you're taking on a big competition, you could create a story around that. That's what I call the David Goliath story, or the competition story. But so origin story, personal story, imagine, customer story, and David Goliath story. I'll only talk about three of them, because obviously we don't have that much time, and I think it's important to understand their application. So for a personal story, what I've already told you, the levers thing, the actual story is also a personal story, but I'll give you one more example. And again, this is a phenomenal talk by Satya Nadella, whom we all know. And it's an 11-12 minute talk on YouTube. You can search Satya Nadella Impact of Education, or the link is also in our notes. What I want to tell you is an 11-minute talk of impact on education, right? And Satya Nadella speaking. So if you ask me Satya Nadella, he'll say tech, Microsoft. Why should I say education, right? So he doesn't have that kind of authority. He's not an authority in education. So what does he do? He starts his talk with a phenomenal personal story. And I will not narrate the whole story, but you will get a gist quickly. Is that he starts by saying, my great-grandfather had died, and the great-grandmother had to move to a city for sustenance. And she had two sons. The older one was working as a day laborer, whereas the second one was younger, and she had money to only send one to school. So she sent the second son to school. This daily laborer, the older son, struggled, kept on working, forever earning a similar amount of money, whereas the second son, the one who went to school, became a police officer. And when he started working, which was many years after the older brother, his salary was exponentially higher, right? And then he says, because he had a good education, he gave his son a good education, who gave Satya a good education, and the whole trajectory changes. One decision of choosing whom to educate has really made a hell of a difference. And after this, he talks about the importance of education. Now imagine the implication of this, right? Suddenly I have respect for him. He becomes likable. And now I feel this guy knows. This guy is an authority on the topic. I should listen to this guy. He really does a phenomenal job. I request everyone to kind of go and watch the video. It's brilliant. So that's the personal story thing. You can talk about it comfortably in business meetings. Obviously, it has to be relevant, right? In this case, he picked a story that was relevant to talking about education. In your presentation to your CEO, you'll have to pick something else. The point being, relevance is the question, right? So that's a personal story. Another story I want to talk about is the imagine story. And this is beautiful, especially if you're in tech, wherein, let's say you are you are making a sales presentation. Right? You have built an app for a company. Say this company is a medical devices company. I'm just randomly thinking of an example. These guys are B2B sales, so they go to hospitals and diagnostic centers and sell their devices. You have built an app for these salespeople to make their life completely simple, save time, increase sales. You go to the sales meeting, you will talk about standard things like product, benefit, features, demo, blah, blah, blah. You have to say the same thing, but with a story. And the story could be, you start the meeting by saying, imagine. Imagine a world where now you have deployed the app. The app has been deployed. How does the life of the salesperson change? So you talk about the salesperson's life. He wakes up in the morning or she wakes up in the morning. All the appointments of the day are in the app. She knows exactly where to go when you land at that place, you log in your attendance. So the company knows that you have gone, because these are issues, right? I mean, did you go to the market, blah, blah, blah. Then you know last time when you came here, what was the discussion, because you have made notes in the app. You know what was the order given. Maybe the payment is stuck. Maybe the payment went through. Maybe the order did not get delivered. All those information is there. How the sales call improves, because you're enabling the salesperson. And then this person maybe completes the day. All the expenses can be just one click. You can take pictures of the expenses and file it. You save time. The management is also getting a broad view, right? Which geography today, how much I sold, what is happening. Now, if you talk about imagine and you talk about from the point of view of the salesperson and the top management, suddenly this person is imagining, oh my God, Acha, can you do that? Can you do this? Same features, same benefits. But now the narrative is imagine. That's all. I have used it personally. I'm telling you, it's magical. So imagine is another template I love. A lot of people talk about this template. The last template which we have time to talk about is the customer story template. And I will give an example in the context of an investor deck. So how does an investor deck look like? 99% decks that I have seen in my life are problem, solution, USP, market size, team, traction, business model. All of them start like this. Imagine an investor looking at this deck every day, day in and day out. All the decks look the same. What you have to do is flip it. Say you are a startup selling ERP software to schools, right? Don't start with problem, solution, opportunity. Start with a customer story template. Pick a customer. Put a photo of a school, AB High School, Madurai. This school has this many kids, this kind of complexity, maybe 2-3 branches. These guys have these problems. These problems were ailing them, so they tried some solution. Didn't work. They tried our solution. We quickly installed it in 3 days, 5 days, whatever that USP you have, right? We quickly installed it for them. Everybody has access, blah, blah, blah. Now what has happened? The school is happy. The reconciliation of payment is happening. The attendance is easy. The this is happening. The that is happening. There are a few things. Then you say, look, testimonial. The owner of the school is saying, oh my God, I am so happy, right? This is so cool. Then you say, like this, there are X thousands of schools in the country multiplied by my SaaS model of how we charge the customer per month makes me this kind of a market size, right? All the same things, if you notice, problem, solution, USP, market size. But now, through one example, what happens when you give an example like a customer story template is people start understanding better. They start paying attention. They believe you because you're giving a real example, which I can verify. And I can easily remember this particular school and its problems rather than a generic school and its problems. And I start caring, because everybody and investors' kids also would be in school, right? And they have also gone to school. They can start relating to these. So these are the 3 templates I think we had the time also to kind of talk about in detail. But yes, I mean, there are many more templates and depending on the need, you can always use them.
Great. Thanks, Vivek. So in fact, good you mentioned, made to stick, because I found it to be a great, book as well. Absolutely. And in fact, on their website, they have a PPT template which can be used to craft the presentation. And so in fact, I was just thinking, if you look at stories, right? If you look at, I'm just slightly digressing, but I think it's important, is if you look at the whole transfer of knowledge from in humans from generations to generations before writing technology was invented was all through stories, and stories which were heard, right? So the village or the tribe elder would kind of, at the evening after they've would tell a story, right? Maybe this was the day, this was how the challenges which they faced, this is how we did, So this was a kind of a daily routine which kind of giving information, etc., and kind of embedding that into everyone's psyche. So storytelling is not it is, I would also argue that it is something very akin to a survival skill as well, right? Something akin to that. Another thing what you mentioned, for example, when you talk about the whole framework of like how in the HUL story you kind of really created a good perception about the company. So which is true, right? Because even when you talk of word of mouth, or when you talk of referral, or when you talk of recommendation, that has a story inbuilt, right? For example, someone say, hey, you know what, can you recommend a good XYZ? Then, and if it's a good recommendation, you say, oh yes, I would recommend this vendor, this partner. He did a great job. He had this problem, and we got that. So even in a recommendation, there is an element of story always there.
Absolutely.
That also when you talk about stories, and if you look at how people kind of relate to story, right? Something which is personal, people will feel more affinity to that. So even, for example, when you talk of an imagined story, I was just trying to draw a parallel in the way how Steve Jobs and how Apple used to look at communications, right? It was never about features, right? So their storytelling was a craft where they said, okay, this is what is the world imagined, and this is what Apple can help you do that. I guess that a good story, which is also imagined story, kind of also creates the FOMO effect, right? Because especially when you're talking of a sales kind of a scenario, and when you paint a very nice imagined story, you're essentially setting the context for a FOMO. Because if the audience is already in their mental map, right, thinking about how the situation would be after using the product, and now when it's time for the commercial negotiations or so, that's always the back of the mind, right? They don't want to miss that. So that's really really nice. And also when you talked about the example which you gave about the ERP school case, and make it personal, right? I think even that's the question of that was example given in the book Made to Stick, wherein I think they ran some kind of experiment for getting money from donors, right? And it was some appeal saying that, hey, you know what, please make a donation for so and so. So it was a very generic thing that, okay, please donate for victims in Africa or something like that. Then they contrasted that with the real story that meet Albert, right? He's a kid in a rural part of Africa, XYZ. These are these kind of daily survival challenges, and hey, you know what? This could change with something like this, and it just costs some whatever X dollars per day, and please, so you can do that. And that really saw a jump in that. So which is really relevant. So yeah. So again, one point which I just wanted to check with you is whenever you talk of a story, and when the presenter is kind of talking about a story, he has his perspective or his point of view, right? Mm-hmm. Now the audience may have a different point of view, right, or a specific area or a specific thing. So how should you factor in that? What would be an audience point of view for when you kind of structure or craft a story? So any tips on that?
See, it is absolutely essential to think about the audience. In fact, the first tip, if you look for how to make a good presentation, is audience analysis, right? So you will have to, obviously if you had time, you could have gone deep on that, but the point being, before you build your content, right? And when I say content, you're thinking about the story, but also the data, right? I mean, story is just how you are packaging the data. It's still the data that is important. When you are before you put pen to paper and think about what you have to say, you have to take some time out to understand the context in which you're making the presentation, which is time, audience, and objective. What do you want your audience to do at the end of the presentation? How much time do you have, and what does the audience want from the meeting, right? What are they thinking? What is their knowledge about the topic? What is their bias about the topic, if you are aware of it, right? And their expectations. Knowing all of this, you'll have to then start saying, okay, this is my message. The message comes before the story. If I say this, I will be able to meet my objective. To say this, what data I need, and hence what story I need. Because I'll tell you an analogy that I love, which is a story. If you've seen those, a lot of plants, how do they spread and survive, right? The seed is there, but there is a what is it called? The feather on the top, which takes the seed into faraway places, right?
Yeah.
The seed is the data, the opinion, the insight, but it won't spread if there is no feather, which is the story, right? So you have the data. See, data is what you have. You have an opinion which you have to convince your investors or your company with, right? Every presentation is about, hey, look, I believe in this. You also have to believe in this. That belief is the data. That is the seed, but you need the story. So first comes the audience, then comes the message, then comes the story that will drive that message. Right. So yeah, I think that's a very valid question.
I think, was it David Ogilvy or someone who said that truth well told, right?
Yeah, I don't know who said, but it is a very fair thing. A story is truth well told. Correct.
Yeah,
in fact, it's
exactly.
A lot of people refer to it, and it's very, very fair.
Right.
But I also want to talk about two things that you were mentioning. One being, I think the reason also these things work. I mean, you were talking about Apple and how storytelling there happens. In fact, there's a beautiful book called Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. I think that is a good book people should check out. I think that the thing that we are seeing underlying is emotion. See, when you say in a presentation tip that please use emotions to persuade people, people think, emotion. But the point is the story has the emotion already. And that's why it works. The data has all the logic. The story brings in the emotional bit, the roller coaster, the ride. That's why it works. And the second thing I would like to call out is that beautiful example you gave. I really made me think and remember something about donating to Africa versus donating to a particular person, right? And I think Mother Teresa has gone on record and said that if I look at the crowd, I would not act, but if I look at one, I would, right? The question being, and in fact, I call this story template. It's also a template, by the way, and I call it the power of one. Whenever you think you want to communicate and you have too many things to say, like big data and all of that stuff, go to one, go to a unit and tell that story, and then you extrapolate it. Because in the 30,000 feet view, you miss the emotions of individual cases. So that, I think, was a very good point that we.
Great. Thanks, Vivek. This gives a great perspective, and thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in. Presentation in the show call notes will have Vivek's social media links and bonus content that you should definitely check. Do subscribe, share, and like this podcast. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and many other platforms. Bye for now. Talk to you soon.